IP mobility. So when you're working with IP networks, there's lots of different types of IP networks. IP can run over many different types of technologies: Ethernet, fiber channel, Wi-Fi, wireless, LTE, 5G, satellite communications. These are all different types of IP networks. And one of the characteristics of IP networks is you need IP addresses. Everything on a network has to have an address. And in some systems, IP addresses can be statically configured. So you assign application, assign a host an IP address, and it doesn't change for the lifetime of that host. But more likely than not, in many systems, these IP addresses are dynamically assigned. And not only can they be different every time you restart the host, but they can be different during the operation. So as the host is operating, its IP address is changing. So what happens when an IP address changes? How can DDS deal with that? And here's a couple of examples of IP address changing. For example, DHCP. DHCP is the mechanism that assigns a host an IP address dynamically, and you don't get it for forever. You get it for a lease period, and at the end of the lease period, it has to be renewed and reassigned. Most of the time, in most systems, you'll get the same IP address back, but that's not guaranteed. You may be assigned a different IP address when your lease runs out. Another example is a moving system. As a system moves from Wi-Fi router to Wi-Fi router, or from cell tower to cell tower, you may be moving between different subnets. And then as you're doing that, your IP address has to change. Let's take an example of a car. A car may be connected to the cloud in various ways. The car itself may have devices connected to the cloud, or perhaps you're in your car and you have your cell phone connected to the cloud. And this is typically over some sort of LTE or 5G network provided by your telecom. Now, your car or your device in the car will be assigned an IP address, okay, by the telecom infrastructure. And let's say you're connected to some cell tower here, and you'll get an IP address. As you move, as you travel, you'll disconnect from one cell tower and connect to another cell tower. And this will happen automatically under the hood. But the IP address that you have could change. Now, sometimes you're assigned the same address again because they know who you are. But then if you travel and you move from a region that's controlled by one telecom and you move to a different telecom, and maybe perhaps you're roaming or something, you may be assigned a different IP address. Okay? And this could happen again and again. You move to another cell and you get another IP address. And of course, what you want to happen is that your applications in your car or on your cell phone are not disconnected from the network. Even though your IP address has changed, even though IP address of the local device has changed, you still want the applications that are running to remain connected to the network. IP mobility. IP mobility is a built-in feature of Connext DDS introduced in Connext DDS 5.3. IP mobility basically enables the domain participant to periodically check or to be notified when the network interfaces of its transport plugins changes. So for UDP, of course, is the IP address or IP NICs, network interfaces. And then if anything changes, the domain participant will be notified of these changes, and then this information will be propagated through discovery to other people. It's kind of like a change of address form when you move from house to house. This is something that will be automatically done. So what are our scenarios? There's some example scenarios. You start an application, you start a host, and the DDS application started even though the host isn't connected to the network yet. The host isn't connected to the network, there is no IP address, but then after a while the host gets an IP address, and with IP mobility, DDS will automatically recognize that and start using that new network. DHCP, so talked about this already. When you are assigned an IP address through DHCP, you get it for a certain period of time called a lease period, and that at the end of the lease period, it is possible, unusual but possible, to get a different address. So when your lease expires, the DHCP server gives you a new address. Well, DDS is able to work through this. It'll start it starts by using the old address, and then when the DHCP server gives it a new address, the domain participant will be notified, or will notice that this has happened, and then start using that new address. Switching network interfaces. I have a computer, I'm sitting in a conference room, I'm connected to the Ethernet, but then I want to move throughout the building. I want to take my laptop with me. So what I do is I turn on the Wi-Fi, okay, then I disconnect myself from the Ethernet. I like to, if I'm using DDS at that time, I don't want my DDS connection to be disabled. I don't want to have to restart my application to use that new Wi-Fi interface. I want it to sort of automatically happen. And with IP mobility, DDS does just that. And then we really sort of looked at this use case. You have an IP address change when you're moving. So I've perhaps a tablet, I'm connected to a Wi-Fi router, and I'm assigned an IP address by that router. But then I'm moving, I take my tablet and I move to a different part of the building, a different building, and I get a new address, and DDS will automatically, RTI Connext DDS will automatically detect that change and start using that new address without me having to restart anything. IP mobility is a built-in feature of Connext DDS. It's something you don't have to turn on, but you may want to turn off, and you may want to configure it. So there are situations in which you say, no, I don't. I want DDS to use a specific IP address. I don't want it to start using other ones. So you can tell it to turn off the interface tracking. And then another feature is interface poll period. So basically, if for some operating systems, we actually have to ask periodically the network, have you changed? And for other operating systems, DDS will actually register its interest, and the operating system will fundamentally signal us that something has changed. You'll have to figure out which operating system you're on, and then based on that, whether or not you need to set the poll period. I mean, whether or not we're polling for it or not. If we are polling for it, by default, it's a 500 milliseconds poll period. So by default, IP mobility is enabled. Okay, the configuration is per transport plugin, though. So you can enable it for UDP-v4 and disable it for TCP, etc. Of course, IP mobility is not relevant to all transport plugins, like shared memory. Shared memory either is there or is not there. It doesn't ever change its quote-unquote interface address. So, in summary, IP mobility is a built-in feature, allows Connext DDS to accommodate changes in the IP network of the local host, whether the IP address has changed or whether network interfaces are being enabled or disabled. And then, on the wire, what's happening is when such changes occur, Connext DDS will send new discovery packets telling remote applications that its address has changed.